Deep beneath the surface of countless worlds across the galaxy, in chambers carved from living rock and reinforced with technologies beyond comprehension, ancient beings sleep. Some have slumbered for 60 million years, waiting for the galaxy to become habitable once more. Others have rested for mere centuries, their damaged bodies sustained by archaic life support systems that refuse to let them die. These sleepers are not dead, but neither are they truly alive. They exist in a twilight state between consciousness and oblivion, preserved by machines that were already ancient when humanity first learned to forge bronze. Now imagine this: a tomb within a tomb, a sleeping giant encased in adamantium and ceramite, its sarcophagus containing the remnants of a space marine hero buried deep within chambers that were old when the Imperium was young. And surrounding this interloper, stretching for kilometers in every direction, lies another tomb entirely, one built by a civilization that predates humanity by 60 million years. Two relics of different ages, both designed to preserve warriors beyond death, now sharing the same dark and silent space beneath an alien world. This is not merely a coincidence of location. This is a confrontation waiting to happen, a meeting between two of the galaxy's most enduring technologies for cheating death. When the Necrons, those living metal beings who once ruled the stars, begin their slow awakening and discover that something else has been sleeping in their tomb all this time, the encounter that follows becomes inevitable. What happens when Xenos technology encounters Imperial machinery? What occurs when beings who have already conquered death in their own way discover another race's attempt to do the same? The scenario is both fascinating and terrifying. It represents a collision between two vastly different philosophies of immortality, two approaches to preserving warriors beyond their natural lifespan. The Necrons, who transferred their consciousness into bodies of living metal 60 million years ago, meeting the Space Marines, who entomb their greatest heroes in walking war machines to serve beyond mortal injury. Both are monuments to civilizations that refuse to let their warriors rest. Both are testaments to the grim determination that defines the Warhammer 40,000 universe. But this encounter is more than just a clash of technologies. It is a meeting of minds separated by an almost incomprehensible gulf of time and evolution. The Necrons remember when the galaxy was young, when the stars themselves were their playthings. They fought against beings of godlike power and survived by becoming something no longer entirely alive. The Space Marine within the Dreadnought, by contrast, is from a younger race, one that learned to traverse the stars only in the past 40,000 years. Yet both have been chosen for a similar fate: eternal service, eternal vigilance, eternal war. The questions this scenario raises are profound. How would Necron tomb systems, designed to detect and neutralize threats from 60 million years ago, respond to a piece of Imperial technology? Would they recognize the Dreadnought as a threat, or would they perceive it as something else entirely? Perhaps even as a kindred creation. And when the Necrons themselves awaken, those immortal overlords who once commanded vast dynasties, what would they make of this strange artifact from a younger civilization, this crude attempt to achieve something the Necrons accomplished eons ago? This is not a common occurrence in the lore of Warhammer 40,000, but it is entirely plausible. The galaxy is vast beyond measure, containing millions of worlds. Many of these planets host both Imperial settlements and ancient Necron tomb complexes, often with neither side aware of the other's presence until it is too late. The Imperium has colonized countless worlds without realizing that ancient machinery slumbers beneath their cities, awaiting activation. And in the chaos of war, it is entirely possible for Imperial forces, including precious dreadnoughts, to be lost in battle, buried by catastrophe, or simply forgotten as campaigns move on and records are lost to time. We are about to explore one of the most intriguing hypothetical scenarios in the grim darkness of the far future. What happens when a Necron tomb world, with all its ancient systems and protocols, discovers that it has an unexpected guest. An Imperial Dreadnought, that walking monument to human stubbornness and the refusal to accept death, slumbering in stasis deep within chambers it was never meant to occupy. Two tombs, two warriors, two entirely different approaches to immortality, all about to collide in ways that neither side could have anticipated. The Necrons, masters of eternal existence. To understand what happens when Necrons encounter a sleeping dreadnought in their tomb, we must first comprehend what the Necrons truly are. They are not simply alien robots or mindless automatons. They are something far more tragic and far more terrifying than that. They are the remnants of a once proud civilization that made a bargain with gods and paid a price beyond imagining. 60 million years ago, long before humanity even existed, the Necrontyr inhabited the galaxy. They were a humanoid species plagued by short lifespans and cancers, induced by the harsh radiation of their dying sun. Despite their brief lives, they achieved technological marvels that would dwarf most of what the Imperium has accomplished. They built vast empires, mastered physics in ways that still seem like magic to younger races, and developed a culture centered on dynastic rule and rigid hierarchy. But they were dying, their civilization doomed by the very star that gave them life. In their desperation, the Necrontyr went to war with the Old Ones, an ancient and powerful species of beings who had mastered the secret of biological immortality. The Necrontyr wanted what the Old Ones possessed, the ability to live indefinitely, to escape the curse of their flesh. But the Old Ones refused to share their knowledge, and so began the war in heaven, a conflict so vast and so destructive that it literally reshaped the galaxy. The Necrontyr were losing. Despite their advanced technology, they could not match the psychic might and biological mastery of the Old Ones. Then they encountered the Satan, the star gods, beings of pure energy that fed on stellar radiation. The Satan promised the Necrontyr everything they desired: immortality, power, and victory over their enemies. All they had to do was undergo biotransference, a process that would transfer their consciousness from their frail organic bodies into shells of living metal called necrodermis. The Necrontyr accepted. Every member of their species underwent the transformation, becoming the Necrons. They got their immortality, but at a terrible cost. The process stripped away their souls, their ability to experience emotion and pleasure, their very sense of self for all but the highest-ranking members of their society. They became living machines, conscious but hollow, aware but unable to feel. The lower-ranking Necrons lost nearly all individual personality, becoming little more than autonomous weapons. Even the nobility, who retained more of their consciousness, found themselves changed in ways they could not fully comprehend. With their new immortal bodies, the Necrons turned the tide of the war in heaven. They slaughtered the Old Ones as servants and drove that ancient species to the brink of extinction. But the war had consequences neither side anticipated. The psychic upheaval caused by billions of deaths tore open the barrier between real space and the warp, allowing entities of pure chaos to pour through. The enslavers, parasitic warp entities, began possessing any creature with psychic potential, threatening to consume all life in the galaxy. Realizing that their victory was meaningless in a galaxy overrun by enslavers, and having successfully shattered their Satan masters into countless fragments to escape their servitude, the Necrons made a final decision. They would enter the Great Sleep, retreating to massive tomb complexes built deep beneath the surface of millions of worlds. There, they would wait out the enslaver plague, their stasis systems designed to preserve them until the galaxy became stable once more and younger races had evolved to repopulate the stars. They set their tomb systems to awaken them in a few million years, when the crisis would be over and they could reclaim their empire. But nothing ever goes according to plan in a galaxy as chaotic as this one. The Necrons slept far longer than intended. 60 million years passed. The galaxy changed completely. New races arose, flourished, and fell. The Eldari, one of the old ones' created species, rose to dominance and then fell into decadence. Humanity spread across the stars, built an empire, survived a catastrophic collapse, and built another empire under the banner of the God Emperor. And through it all, the Necrons slept on, their tomb systems waiting for the right conditions to begin the awakening sequence. The awakening has not been smooth or coordinated. Many tomb worlds have suffered catastrophic failures over the millennia. Some were destroyed by tectonic shifts, crushed by the very planets they were built within. Others were found and attacked by Eldari raiders who remembered the ancient threat the Necrons represented. Still others have simply failed, their systems degrading beyond repair over the impossible span of 60 million years. Of those tomb worlds that have survived, many have awakened early or late, their chronostats malfunctioning, their scheduling systems corrupted by time. The result is a fractured awakening. Necron tomb worlds activate individually, without coordination, each forced to assess its situation and respond according to ancient protocols programmed into their master systems. Some awaken to find themselves beneath thriving human cities, their tomb complexes violated by mining operations and underground construction. Others emerge on dead worlds, still barren after all this time. And some, perhaps most disturbing of all, discover that they are not alone in their sleep, that something else has been buried in their tomb while they slumbered. The Necrons that awaken are not what they once were. The process of biotransference and the long sleep have taken their toll. Many Necrons, particularly the lower-ranking warriors, have lost even the limited consciousness they retained after the transformation. They function on pure programming now, autonomous but not truly aware. The nobility have fared better, but even they struggle with degraded memory banks and corrupted personality matrices. Some overlords awaken thinking they are still fighting the war in heaven, unable to comprehend that 60 million years have passed. Yet despite all this damage, the Necrons remain the most technologically advanced race in the galaxy. Their weapons can strip matter apart, atom by atom. Their ships can phase through solid objects. Their warriors can repair themselves from damage that would utterly destroy any other being. They have achieved a form of immortality that, while hollow and tragic, is nonetheless functional. A destroyed Necron warrior does not die. It is merely teleported back to its tomb for repair and eventual reanimation. For all practical purposes, they cannot be permanently killed, only temporarily disabled. This is what makes the Necrons so terrifying to face. They are an army of unkillable warriors, armed with technology from the dawn of the galaxy, led by overlords who have tactical experience spanning millions of years. They do not need food, water, or rest. They do not feel fear or pain. They simply advance, relentlessly, destroying everything in their path with weapons that make a mockery of conventional armor and shields. And they are waking up across the entire galaxy, tomb world by tomb world, dynasty by dynasty, slowly reclaiming what they see as their rightful domain. When we speak of a Necron tomb discovering a sleeping Dreadnought, we must understand that this is not simply a case of aliens finding human technology. This is a civilization that mastered death encountering another civilization's attempt to do the same. The Necrons transferred their consciousness into immortal machine bodies. The Imperium entombs its greatest warriors in war machines, keeping them alive through advanced life support. Both represent solutions to the same fundamental problem: how to preserve warriors beyond their natural lifespan. Both are monuments to species that refuse to accept the finality of death. The Necrons would recognize this on some level, even if they would never admit kinship with what they see as primitive younger races. They would see in the Dreadnought a crude echo of their own solution, a lesser attempt to achieve what they accomplished perfectly 60 million years ago. And this recognition would color everything that follows, making the encounter between sleeping Necron and sleeping Space Marine something more complex than a simple hostile engagement. Tomb worlds, the sleeping cities of the dead. The Necron tomb worlds are marvels of engineering that mock everything the younger races have accomplished. Built using technologies and physical principles that have been lost even to the Imperium's most learned tech priests, these vast underground complexes were designed to preserve millions, sometimes billions, of Necrons through an impossibly long sleep. They are not simple bunkers or storage facilities. They are self-sufficient cities carved into the bones of planets, powered by energy sources that will function for millions of years, maintained by armies of autonomous constructs, and protected by defense systems capable of destroying entire invasion fleets. The structure of a tomb world defies simple description, because no two are exactly alike. Each was built according to the preferences and resources of its ruling dynasty. Some are relatively compact, occupying only a few cubic kilometers beneath the surface. Others are absolutely vast, honeycombing entire planets with chambers, corridors, and support systems that stretch from crust to core. The tomb complexes make extensive use of extra-dimensional spaces and pocket realities, allowing them to house far more Necrons than their physical dimensions would suggest. From the outside, a tomb might appear to be a simple network of chambers. Step inside, and you discover halls that stretch for kilometers, stasis crypts that hold tens of thousands of warriors, and armories that could supply entire armies. The tomb worlds utilize a technology the Necrons call living metal, or necrodermis. This substance is not truly alive in the biological sense, but it possesses properties that make it seem almost organic. It can repair itself from damage, flowing back together after being torn apart. It responds to electromagnetic commands, allowing Necron systems to reshape architecture and adjust configurations on the fly. Most importantly, it is nearly indestructible by conventional means. A tomb complex built from necrodermis can survive orbital bombardment, seismic upheaval, even the geological shifts that occur over millions of years. This is how Necron structures have endured for 60 million years, while other ancient ruins have crumbled to dust. At the heart of every tomb world lies its master program, sometimes called the tomb mind. This is an artificial intelligence of staggering complexity, though it operates according to very specific protocols programmed before the Great Sleep. The tomb mind oversees every aspect of the tomb's operation during the long slumber. It monitors environmental conditions, both inside and outside the tomb. It directs the canoptech constructs in their endless maintenance duties. It assesses threats and activates appropriate countermeasures. And most critically, it manages the awakening sequence, determining when conditions are right to begin reviving the sleeping Necrons. The awakening process itself is carefully staged to minimize risk. The tomb mind does not simply wake everyone at once. Instead, it follows a strict hierarchy dictated by protocols established millions of years ago. First to wake are the canoptech constructs. If they were ever put to sleep at all, these autonomous machines serve as the tomb's first line of defense and its maintenance crew. They scout the surrounding area, gathering intelligence about what the world has become during the long sleep. They repair any damage to the tomb systems that accumulated over the millennia, and they prepare the resurrection chambers for the revival of organic intelligence. Next to awaken are the lowest-ranking Necron warriors. These are the foot soldiers of the Necron legions, beings that retained very little personality even after biotransference. They function primarily on programmatic instructions, following orders with mechanical precision. The warriors conduct reconnaissance patrols, mapping the area around the tomb and assessing potential threats. This information feeds back to the tomb mind, which uses it to determine how quickly to proceed with the awakening and which units to prioritize for revival. Only after the warriors have secured the immediate area does the tomb begin waking its specialist units and nobility. The immortals, elite infantry with better armament and slightly more autonomy, come online to reinforce the warriors. Destroyers, Necrons who have descended into a genocidal madness, are awakened when the tomb faces serious threats. Heavy constructs like canoptek spiders and tomb stalkers deploy to deal with major incursions. And finally, the nobility themselves emerge from their ornate sarcophagi, the overlords and lords who will command the tomb's forces and make strategic decisions. Throughout this entire process, the tomb's defenses remain active and vigilant. These systems are among the most sophisticated aspects of Necron tomb worlds. They include obvious elements like automated turrets and energy barriers, but also far more exotic technologies. Many tombs possess null-field matrices that disrupt psychic powers and cause demons to simply cease existing within their area of effect. Some have dimensional traps that can phase attacking forces into pocket dimensions where they are torn apart by gravitational shear. Others employ chronological weapons that can age targets to dust in seconds or lock them in temporal stasis. The canoptek constructs deserve special attention because they are often the first Necron technology that intruders encounter. These autonomous machines come in several forms, each designed for specific functions. Canoptek scarabs are small beetle-like constructs that swarm through the tomb in vast numbers. They serve primarily as maintenance units, repairing damage to tomb systems and recycling materials, but they can also be weaponized, forming clouds of millions of scarabs that can strip armor and flesh from targets with terrifying efficiency. Canoptek spiders are larger, spider-like constructs that serve as mobile fabrication units and command nodes for scarab swarms. They can construct new scarabs on the fly, adjust tomb systems, and defend key areas with directed energy weapons. Their ability to phase through solid matter makes them particularly effective at moving through damaged sections of tomb complexes and reaching intruders in areas where larger defenders cannot go. Canoptek wraiths are perhaps the most unsettling of the constructs. These serpentine machines use phase shift technology to exist partially out of phase with real space. This allows them to move through solid walls, ignore most forms of physical damage, and strike at targets from unexpected angles. They serve as the tomb's scouts and assassins, detecting intruders and eliminating them before they can reach critical systems. And then there are the tomb stalkers, massive centipede-like constructs that are to canoptek units what battle tanks are to infantry. These enormous machines burrow through solid rock, their phase technology allowing them to move through the planet's crust as easily as a human might walk through fog. When tomb worlds face serious surface threats, tomb stalkers emerge from the ground to devastating effect, their sheer size and firepower capable of destroying entire armored columns. All of these systems and constructs operate according to incredibly sophisticated threat assessment protocols. The tomb mind constantly evaluates dangers based on parameters set millions of years ago. Minor intrusions might be handled entirely by canoptek constructs without ever waking a single Necron. Moderate threats trigger partial awakenings, bringing online just enough force to neutralize the problem. Only major invasions or existential dangers prompt full tomb activation and the revival of the nobility. This brings us to a critical question. What would these ancient systems make of a dreadnought buried in their tomb? The dreadnought would not register as a typical threat. It is not moving, not attacking, not doing anything that would trigger immediate defensive responses. But it is also not part of the tomb's structure. It is an unknown element, a foreign object in a system designed to maintain absolute control over its environment. This paradox would create a unique situation in the tomb's response protocols. The dreadnought would generate subtle but detectable energy signatures. Its life support systems, even in stasis, require power. Its machine spirit, that fragment of artificial intelligence that inhabits all Imperial technology, maintains minimal functions. These signatures would not match anything in the tomb's vast database of threats. They would not correspond to the energy patterns of the Old One's servants, the primary enemies the tombs were designed to face. They would not match Aeldari technology, which the Necrons have extensive experience with. They would be something new, something that did not exist when the tomb's defensive protocols were programmed. This uncertainty would likely trigger detailed analysis. Canoptech units would investigate, scanning the Dreadnought with sensors that can perceive matter down to the atomic level. They would detect the adamantium and ceramite construction. They would identify the power source, likely nuclear or plasma-based, far cruder than anything the Necrons use. They would find the sarcophagus at the Dreadnought's heart, and the organic components within, preserved in amniotic fluid and sustained by archaic life support. And they would attempt to categorize what they have found according to threat assessment matrices designed for an entirely different era. The tomb world would be trying to answer a fundamental question: is this thing dangerous? But the answer would not be straightforward. The Dreadnought is dormant, representing no immediate threat, but it is clearly a war machine designed for combat. It contains living organic matter, which makes it different from pure machinery, and it is located where it should not be, inside the sacred bounds of a Necron tomb. All of these factors would weigh in the tomb's decision about how to respond. Different tomb worlds might reach different conclusions. A tomb that awakened to find its surroundings completely changed might be paranoid, seeing threats everywhere and responding with maximum force. Such a tomb might simply destroy the Dreadnought immediately, not bothering with detailed analysis. Another tomb, perhaps one that has retained better functionality and clearer protocols, might opt for containment and study, recognizing that the Dreadnought represents technology from a younger race that could provide intelligence about the current state of the galaxy. But eventually, inevitably, the nobility would awaken. And when a Necron overlord, a being who commanded armies in wars that shaped the galaxy millions of years before humanity existed, encounters a Space Marine Dreadnought sleeping in his tomb, the situation would become exponentially more complex. Because unlike the automated systems, the Overlord would have context. He would understand, on some level, what he is looking at. Another civilization's attempt to preserve its warriors beyond death, and he would have to decide what that means. Dreadnoughts, the walking tombs of the Imperium. If the Necrons represent the ultimate achievement in technological immortality, the Dreadnoughts of the Adeptus Astartes represent something perhaps more tragic: the refusal to let heroes die when they should. A Dreadnought is not, as some might think, simply a piloted war machine. It is a walking tomb, a prison of adamantium and ceramite that contains the broken body of a Space Marine who has been mortally wounded but deemed too valuable to let pass into death's embrace. It is both a monument to human determination and a testament to the grim cruelty that permeates the Imperium of man. The technology behind Dreadnoughts stretches back to the Dark Age of technology, that legendary period when humanity reached heights that the Imperium can no longer match. In those ancient days, the first proto-Dreadnoughts were created as combat walkers that could be piloted by ordinary humans. They were war machines, certainly, but they were also tools, vehicles that a soldier could enter and exit at will. The transformation of Dreadnoughts into permanent sarcophagi for the mortally wounded came later, during the Great Crusade, when the Emperor first created the Space Marines. The process of interring a Space Marine in a Dreadnought is lengthy, intricate, and deeply sacred to the chapters that undertake it. Not every fatally wounded Space Marine receives this dubious honor. Only those deemed worthy by the chapter's leadership, typically the chapter master in consultation with the chief apothecary and a chaplain, are selected for internment. The criteria are straightforward, yet demanding. The Marine must have served with exceptional valor and distinction. Their experience and tactical knowledge must be deemed valuable enough to preserve, and crucially, their body must be damaged beyond the ability of even Astartes' physiology and imperial medical technology to repair, yet with enough brain tissue and vital organs intact to sustain within a life support system. When a Marine meets these criteria, the Tech Marines begin their work. First, the dying warrior's body must be stabilized. This alone requires technology that borders on the miraculous, keeping tissue alive that should by all rights be dead. Then comes the most brutal part, the removal of all non-essential tissue and organs. Arms and legs are amputated if they were not already destroyed in battle. Much of the torso is carefully excised. Even portions of the face may be removed. What remains is a torso containing the vital organs, a head with an intact brain, and a spinal column. This reduced form, smaller than a human child, is the pilot that will control a machine 3 times the height of a man. This remaining biological component is then suspended in amniotic fluid within a life support sarcophagus. This armored coffin is equipped with every system necessary to keep the Marine alive indefinitely. Nutrient feeds provide sustenance. Waste recycling systems eliminate biological byproducts. Medical monitors track every vital sign, ready to inject chemicals or stimulants as needed. And most critically, neural interface ports connect directly to the Marine's brain and nervous system, allowing him to control the Dreadnought as if it were his own body. The sarcophagus is then integrated into the Dreadnought chassis itself. This process creates a permanent bond. The Marine can never leave the sarcophagus. He will never breathe unfiltered air again, never feel sunlight on skin, never taste food or drink, never touch another being. His entire existence from this point forward will be mediated through machines, experienced through sensors, and projected through speakers. He becomes, in essence, a living computer core for a walking battle tank. The Dreadnought body itself is a masterwork of Imperial engineering, even if that engineering is based on technologies the Imperium no longer fully understands. The most common pattern, the Castroferum, stands roughly 4.5 meters tall, a humanoid form built from layers of adamantium and ceramite armor. One arm typically mounts a devastating heavy weapon: assault cannons that fire thousands of rounds per minute, plasma cannons that unleash miniature suns, las cannons that can punch through tank armor. The other arm usually features a massive power fist capable of crushing ferrocrete to dust, often with an underslung weapon, like a heavy flamer for dealing with infantry at close range. But the Dreadnought is more than the sum of its weapons and armor. Its true power lies in the pilot within. A space marine who survives to be interred in a Dreadnought is by definition a veteran of countless battles. He has decades, sometimes centuries, of tactical experience. He has seen patterns of warfare repeat across multiple campaigns. He knows the strengths and weaknesses of various enemy types, not from training manuals, but from direct combat. This wisdom, combined with the Dreadnought's firepower and durability, makes these walking tombs devastatingly effective on the battlefield. However, the life of a Dreadnought pilot is one of profound suffering. The neural interface allows the Marine to move the Dreadnought's limbs and aim its weapons, but it provides no sensation. He cannot feel the ground beneath the Dreadnought's feet. He cannot sense the recoil of weapons firing. Everything is translated into data, cold and sterile. The warrior who once felt the satisfaction of a blade striking home now experiences only an acknowledgement that a target has been hit. The sensory deprivation is total and maddening. Worse still is the psychological toll. The Marine remains fully conscious and aware, trapped in darkness within his sarcophagus. He can communicate through speakers, can process external information through the Dreadnought sensors, but he is fundamentally isolated from the world. When activated for battle, he fights with all the skill and fury he possessed in life. But when the battle ends and he is returned to his chapter's fortress monastery, the true nightmare begins. Because the strain of piloting a Dreadnought is immense. The neural interface causes mental fatigue, confusion, even episodes of what might be called machine madness. Extended operation can cause the pilot to lose track of time, to become disoriented, to forget which of his memories are real and which might be artifacts of damaged neural pathways. To preserve what sanity remains, most dreadnoughts are put into stasis sleep between battles. The sarcophagus is placed in a specialized chamber, often called a sepulchre, where the pilot enters a form of suspended animation. This sleep is not peaceful. Many dreadnought pilots report nightmares during stasis. Dreams of battles long past that blur with present conflicts. Some wake disoriented, believing they are still fighting wars from centuries ago. Others emerge with gaps in their memory, unable to recall entire campaigns. The oldest dreadnoughts, those who have been awakened and put back to sleep dozens or hundreds of times over the course of millennia, often show signs of severe mental degradation. They may be confused about when they are, unable to recognize brothers they fought alongside centuries before, or obsessed with enemies long since extinct. Yet despite all this suffering, dreadnoughts serve. They serve because they are programmed to serve, their duties written into the very core of their being as Space Marines. They serve because their chapters need them. And the concept of duty runs deeper than any consideration of personal comfort. And they serve because, on some level, they know that if they stop, if they give up, then their suffering will have been for nothing. The pain must have purpose, and that purpose is eternal war in the name of the Emperor. The various patterns of dreadnought reflect different eras of Imperial history. The Contemptor pattern, rare and revered, dates back to the Great Crusade and features more advanced systems than later designs, including shielding technology that makes them more resilient. The Castroferrum pattern is the most common, a reliable if less sophisticated design that the Imperium still knows how to maintain, if not fully recreate. The Redemptor pattern is a recent development designed for Primaris Space Marines. More powerful, but with the disturbing tendency to burn out its pilot's biological components much faster than older designs. Regardless of pattern, all dreadnoughts share certain characteristics. They are revered by their chapters as both weapons of war and living links to the past. They are housed in sacred halls when not in use, their sepulchres tended by tech marines who perform ritual maintenance and pray to the machine spirits within. They are awakened only when needed, whether for battle or to provide counsel, their wisdom sought by chapter leadership facing difficult decisions. And they all contain Space Marines who, given the choice, might have preferred the clean death of a warrior in his prime to this endless half-life in a walking tomb. When we consider a dreadnought buried in a Necron tomb world, we must understand what that dreadnought represents. It is not merely a piece of technology. It contains a warrior of the Adeptus Astartes, a being whose mind was created to know no fear and whose body was enhanced to superhuman levels. Even entombed and in stasis, that mind remains, dreaming whatever dreams torment dreadnoughts in their sleep. The life support systems continue to function. The machine spirits maintain their vigil, and somewhere in the darkness of that adamantium sarcophagus, a Space Marine waits for the call to battle that may never come. This creates a strange symmetry with the Necrons sleeping around it. Both the Dreadnought and the Necron warriors in their stasis crypts are warriors preserved beyond their natural state. Both sleep in tombs deep underground, waiting for the call to wake. Both serve masters who refuse to let them rest. The difference is that the Necrons chose their fate, however terrible the consequences turned out to be. The Space Marine in the Dreadnought had no choice at all. His chapter decided his fate while he lay dying, and he woke to find himself trapped in metal for the rest of a potentially very long existence. How a Dreadnought ends up in a Necron tomb. The galaxy is vast beyond human comprehension. In the Imperium alone, there are roughly 1 million known worlds, and that represents only a fraction of the habitable planets in the Milky Way. Many of these worlds have been colonized multiple times by different civilizations across the eons. A planet that hosted thriving Necrontire cities 60 million years ago might later become an Aldari maiden world, then a human agricultural colony, then a war zone, then ruins, then be recolonized again. The layers of history pile up like geological strata, and often the inhabitants of one layer have no idea what lies beneath their feet. This is how a tomb world can exist beneath an imperial settlement without anyone realizing it. The Mechanicus survey teams that examined the planet before colonization might have detected unusual mineral formations or strange magnetic anomalies in the crust, but these would likely be attributed to natural geological processes rather than ancient Xenos technology. Even if they discovered artificial structures deep underground, those structures might be dismissed as ruins from some minor Xenos species that went extinct millions of years ago, deemed not worth the effort to excavate and study. And so the colony is established, cities are built, and no one knows that an entire civilization sleeps beneath them, waiting. Into this complicated situation, add war. The Imperium of man has been at war continuously for the past 10,000 years. Space Marine chapters are deployed across the galaxy, fighting on hundreds or thousands of worlds simultaneously. These are not simple conflicts. They are grinding campaigns that can last for decades or centuries, consuming entire generations of warriors. Battle barges crash, strike cruisers are shot down, drop pods scatter Marines across vast areas, and in the chaos of these engagements, things get lost. A dreadnought is both too valuable to simply abandon and, paradoxically, easy to lose track of in the right circumstances. These walking tombs are not deployed for every engagement. They are reserved for situations where their firepower and durability are essential, or where their pilot's experience and wisdom might turn the tide of battle. When awakened and sent to war, a dreadnought typically operates as part of a larger force, supported by battle brothers who can provide tactical flexibility and protect the somewhat slow-moving machine from threats it might struggle to counter alone. But battles rarely go according to plan. Consider a scenario. A Space Marine strike force deploys to a world that intelligence reports as hosting a relatively minor enemy presence. The dreadnought is awakened because the terrain includes underground complexes that will require urban assault tactics, and the pilot's experience in similar environments 300 years prior is deemed valuable. The Marines establish a beachhead, begin their advance, and then everything goes wrong. Perhaps the enemy was stronger than intelligence suggested, and the Space Marines find themselves fighting a fighting retreat against overwhelming numbers. Perhaps orbital bombardment destroys the landing zone, cutting off extraction routes. Perhaps tectonic instability, caused by the battle itself, triggers cave-ins and geological upheaval. In the chaos, the dreadnought and its supporting squad are separated from the main force. They fight on, as Space Marines do, but eventually the situation becomes untenable. Orders come through to withdraw to secondary extraction points. The dreadnought moves to comply, but before it can reach safety, the ground collapses. The tunnel system the Marines were using crumbles. Thousands of tons of rock and debris come crashing down. The regular Space Marines might escape, their powered armor allowing them to leap to safety or phase through the collapse using teleportation technology if available. But the dreadnought, massive and less agile, is caught in the cave-in. It is buried under rubble that would crush a normal vehicle, but dreadnoughts are built to survive. The pilot's sarcophagus is one of the most heavily armored components, designed to protect the precious human core, even if the entire chassis is destroyed. So the dreadnought survives the collapse, but it is now buried deep underground, tons of rock pinning it in place. Its power systems begin to fail, damaged by the impact or simply running out of fuel. The machine's spirits detect the danger and initiate emergency protocols, putting the pilot into deep stasis to conserve remaining power. The dreadnought goes dormant, its systems barely functioning, waiting for rescue that may never come. Above ground, the battle continues. The Space Marines might try to recover their fallen brother, but if the situation is desperate enough, they may have to make the hard choice to leave him and save the rest of the force. They mark his position as best they can, intending to return later with proper excavation equipment. But later never comes. The campaign moves to other worlds. Records are corrupted or lost in subsequent conflicts. Centuries pass. The chapter that deployed the Dreadnought might itself be destroyed or reorganized. The planet might be abandoned by the Imperium entirely, deemed not worth the resources to hold. And deep below the surface, the Dreadnought continues to sleep, forgotten by everyone who knew it was there. Now, here is where the Necron tomb enters the picture. The Dreadnought, in its collapse and burial, has fallen into a region that intersects with the Necron tomb complex. This might seem like an impossible coincidence, but remember that tomb worlds often extend for enormous distances underground. Their chambers and corridors honeycomb the planet's crust, sometimes even reaching into the mantle. A significant seismic event could easily cause a collapse that breaches one of these passages, dumping surface material, including an entombed Dreadnought, into Necron territory. The Dreadnought might not end up in a major tomb chamber. It could fall into a maintenance tunnel used by Canoptech constructs, or a storage area containing inactive Necron technology, or even a region of the tomb that was never completed before the Great Sleep commenced. The important point is that it is now within the tomb's boundaries, subject to the monitoring of the tomb's systems, even if those systems have not fully activated yet. Another plausible scenario involves battlefield losses during an active conflict. If Space Marines are fighting on a world that happens to be a tomb world in the early stages of awakening, and if that battle becomes violent enough, a Dreadnought could be destroyed or critically damaged. The Astartes might attempt to recover it, as they always do, but Necron phase technology could interfere. Perhaps the Dreadnought falls into a dimensional trap, or is dragged into a sublayer of the tomb through phase shift technology during the fighting. The Space Marines might even see it vanish, unable to determine what happened or how to retrieve it. There is also the possibility, however remote, of intentional capture. If a Necron cryptech, one of the techno-mages who serve as the Necron's scientists and engineers, takes an interest in Imperial technology, he might order the capture of intact examples for study. A Dreadnought would be an interesting specimen, representing a younger race's attempt to achieve something approximating immortality through technology. The cryptech could have the Dreadnought transported into the tomb for detailed analysis, intending to dissect it and learn from its design. But if the tomb then enters a period of dormancy before the examination is completed, the Dreadnought might be left in storage, forgotten in the depths while the Necrons return to their sleep. Consider also the scenario where a chapter might intentionally bury one of their Dreadnoughts as part of a strategic gambit. In desperate situations where extraction is impossible and the enemy is overwhelming, Space Marines have been known to make hard choices about what can be saved and what must be left behind. A chapter master, facing the loss of his entire force, might order that the Dreadnoughts be placed in the deepest, most secure locations available, with the hope that they might survive whatever catastrophe is about to befall the surface. Beacon transponders would be activated, coordinates logged, and prayers offered that future generations might return to recover these honored ancients. But if that catastrophe is severe enough, if it involves orbital bombardment or geological upheaval, or even planetary tectonic shifts, those carefully chosen secure locations might become breached, their occupants sliding deeper into the planet's crust and potentially into Necron-controlled territory. Weather and environmental factors can also play crucial roles in such scenarios. Many tomb worlds are located on planets with extreme conditions, precisely because the Necrons chose worlds that other species would find inhospitable. A Dreadnought deployed to such a world might find itself fighting in conditions where the environment itself becomes as deadly as the enemy. Massive dust storms that last for months could bury entire battlefields. Flash floods in ancient canyons could sweep away equipment and vehicles. Avalanches triggered by seismic activity or combat could entomb entire companies. In such circumstances, a Dreadnought could easily be lost, its transponder signal blocked by kilometers of debris. Its location impossible to triangulate through conventional means. The planet Imperium provides a semi-canonical example of how Imperial and Necron structures can become intermingled. This world was both an Imperial burial world and, unknown to most, a Necron tomb world. The presence of an ancient crashed battle barge on the surface and extensive Adeptus Mechanicus excavations into the underground Necron structures demonstrates how different layers of technology and civilization can coexist. While there is no specific mention of a Dreadnought in the Imperium lore, the situation described makes it entirely plausible that such an artifact could have ended up in the Necron sections of the planet during one of the many conflicts that occurred there. Time is also a crucial factor. A Dreadnought might have been buried on a world centuries or even millennia before the local Necron tomb begins its awakening sequence. From the Dreadnought's perspective, locked in stasis, no time passes at all. The pilot sleeps dreamlessly, his consciousness completely suspended. But in the world outside, centuries turn to millennia. The surface of the planet changes, ecosystems evolve or die off, civilizations rise and fall. And deep below, Necron chronostats count down the years until the programmed awakening time arrives. When that awakening finally begins, when the tomb systems start their analysis of the surrounding environment and initiate the revival of their defenders, they discover that during the long sleep, something new has arrived, something that registers on their sensors as artificial, powered, and containing organic matter, something that, according to their records, should not exist. The tomb's automated systems must then decide how to categorize this anomaly and whether it represents a threat requiring response. The critical point is that the scenarios that could lead to a Dreadnought being buried in a Necron tomb are not fantastical or contrived. They are entirely consistent with the nature of the Warhammer 40,000 setting. Wars span continents and last for centuries. Soldiers are lost in the confusion. Records are corrupted or destroyed. Planets are abandoned and forgotten, only to be recolonized later by people who have no idea what lies beneath their new homes. And the galaxy is so vast, with so many worlds and so many conflicts occurring simultaneously, that statistically speaking, nearly anything that can happen eventually will happen somewhere. A Dreadnought buried in a Necron tomb is not common, but neither is it impossible. It is simply another example of the layers of tragedy and irony that define the grim darkness of the far future. Two warriors, both entombed by civilizations that refuse to let their heroes rest, sleeping in the same darkness, waiting for the day when something wakes them and forces them into conflict once more. The initial discovery. Tomb systems. Detect the intruder. The first indication that something is wrong would come from the Canoptech constructs. These tireless machines patrol the tomb ceaselessly, even when the Necrons themselves sleep. Their purpose is maintenance and defense, and they have been performing these functions for 60 million years with mechanical precision. They know every chamber, every corridor, every power conduit in the vast complex. They detect the slightest deviation from normal parameters, a crack in a wall, a fluctuation in energy flow, an unauthorized presence in a restricted area. The Dreadnought would register on their sensors as an anomaly long before its exact nature could be determined. The first detection might be thermal. Even in stasis, the Dreadnought's sarcophagus maintains a slight temperature difference from the surrounding rock, the result of residual power, keeping critical life support systems at minimum function. Canoptech scarabs, patrolling a nearby corridor, might detect this temperature gradient and investigate, their programming directing them toward anything unusual. As the scarabs approach, they would begin gathering more detailed data. They would detect the electromagnetic signature of the Dreadnought's power source, likely a nuclear reactor or plasma core of a design completely unlike Necron technology. They would identify the construction materials, adamantium and ceramite, substances that exist in the Necron database, but are associated with much younger civilizations. They would map the object's shape, finding a roughly humanoid form that does not correspond to any known threat, from the War in Heaven era. Most critically, they would detect life signs. The organic component within the sarcophagus produces a biological signature that is unmistakable even through layers of metal and in a state of extreme stasis. There is a heartbeat, so slow as to be almost imperceptible, perhaps 1 beat per minute or even slower. There is brain activity, minimal but present. The electrical patterns of a consciousness suspended in deep sleep. There is body heat, carefully regulated by the life support systems. All of these factors mark the Dreadnought as containing living organic matter, something the tomb systems are specifically programmed to monitor. The information gathered by the scarabs would be transmitted to larger canoptech units for analysis. Canoptech spiders, serving as regional command nodes, would receive the data and begin attempting to classify the anomaly. They would run it through threat assessment matrices, comparing the energy signature, composition, and configuration against databases of known enemies. Nothing would match. The Dreadnought does not correspond to any technology used by the Old Ones or their servant races. It is too primitive to be Old One work, too advanced to be from the early civilizations that existed before the Necrons' sleep. This creates a problem for automated systems that are designed to operate according to predefined protocols. The tomb's defenses know how to respond to Eldari incursions, having fought that race for millions of years. They know how to handle certain types of mechanical intruders, having encountered automated systems from other civilizations. But a Dreadnought is neither of these things. It is a war machine containing organic life, built with technologies that did not exist when the tomb's defense protocols were programmed, in a configuration that defies easy categorization. The canoptech spiders would likely escalate the matter to the tomb mind itself, that vast artificial intelligence that oversees all tomb operations. The tomb mind is far more sophisticated than individual canoptech units, capable of more complex analysis and decision-making. It would examine the Dreadnought from every angle, both literally and figuratively, trying to determine what this thing is and what level of threat it represents. Several factors would complicate this analysis. First, the Dreadnought is not active. It is not moving, not communicating, not emitting the kind of active sensor sweeps or targeting protocols that would clearly identify it as a hostile combatant. From the tomb's perspective, the intruder is dormant, possibly damaged or abandoned. This significantly reduces the apparent threat level. A sleeping enemy is less dangerous than an active one after all. Second, the technology is clearly primitive by Necron standards, even if it would be considered advanced by the standards of the Imperium. The tomb mind can analyze the Dreadnought's power source and recognize it as a relatively crude fusion or fission design, nothing like the efficient energy systems the Necrons use. The armor is thick and durable, certainly, but it lacks the self-repair properties of living metal. The weapons, while potent, operate on straightforward ballistic or plasma principles rather than the exotic physics employed by Necron arms. In every measurable way, the Dreadnought is inferior to Necron technology. Third, and perhaps most intriguing from the tomb mind's perspective, the Dreadnought contains organic life preserved in a state of artificial suspension. This would be recognizable to the tomb systems. The Necrons themselves once existed as organic beings. They remember what biological life support looks like, even if that memory is 60 million years old. The tomb mind would identify the amniotic fluid, the nutrient feeds, the waste recycling systems, all the technology required to keep a living being alive indefinitely in a small enclosed space. And it would recognize these as serving the same basic purpose as the Necron's own stasis crypts, preserving life beyond its natural span. This recognition would be crucial. The tomb mind might classify the Dreadnought not as a conventional weapon system, but as something else entirely, a preservation chamber. In Necron terms, it would be seen as an inferior attempt to achieve what the Necrons accomplished perfectly through biotransference. The being inside is kept alive rather than having its consciousness transferred to an immortal body, but the intent is similar. This classification might lower the perceived threat level even further. categorizing the Dreadnought as more of a curiosity than a danger. However, the tomb mind would also recognize that this is clearly military technology. The weapons alone make that obvious, and the armor is built for combat, not peaceful purposes. Even dormant, the Dreadnought represents a potential threat if awakened. The question the tomb mind must answer is, does this threat require immediate neutralization, or can it be contained and monitored for now? The decision would depend on several factors. What stage of awakening is the tomb in? If the tomb is still in very early stages, with only canoptech constructs active and the Necron themselves still sleeping, the tomb mind might opt for a conservative approach. Destroying the Dreadnought could be done easily enough, but doing so would expend energy and might trigger defensive responses if the machine has fail-safe systems. Better to contain it, monitor it, and make a final decision once the Necron nobility are awake to provide strategic guidance. If the tomb is in later stages of awakening, with Necron warriors already active and conducting patrols, the calculus changes. The tomb is less vulnerable, more capable of handling threats, but it is also more paranoid, more aware of dangers in the current galaxy. The tomb mind might decide that any unknown technology represents an unacceptable risk and order its immediate destruction. The most sophisticated response would be to deploy canoptech wraiths for detailed reconnaissance. These phase-shifting constructs could move through the Dreadnought's armor as if it were not there, physically entering the machine to examine its internal systems without damaging anything. A wraith could observe the sarcophagus directly, examine the organic being within, even interface with the Dreadnought's machine spirit to extract data. This would provide the tomb mind with complete intelligence about what the intruder is and what capabilities it possesses. Imagine the wraith phasing through the Dreadnought's adamantium hull, its sensors taking in every detail of the ancient Imperial technology. It would observe the pilot suspended in amniotic fluid, the Space Marine's body reduced to essential organs and nervous tissue, kept alive by systems that are simultaneously sophisticated by human standards and primitive by Necron ones. It would detect the neural interface ports, recognizing them as control mechanisms that allow the organic brain to command the mechanical body. It would analyze the weapons, the power source, the structural integrity, building a complete picture of the machine's capabilities. All of this data would flow back to the tomb mind, where it would be processed and analyzed. The tomb mind would conclude that the Dreadnought represents a young race's solution to preserving warriors beyond mortal injury. It would note the similarities to Necron technology and the vast differences in implementation and success. It would calculate that the Dreadnought, if activated, could cause significant damage to canoptech constructs and even Necron warriors, but would pose no serious threat to the tomb itself or to higher-tier Necron units. Based on this analysis, the tomb mind would likely choose to contain rather than destroy. Canoptech units would be deployed to establish a perimeter around the Dreadnought. Energy barriers might be erected to prevent any escape if the machine somehow activated on its own. The area would be monitored constantly, with sensors tracking any change in the Dreadnought's status, and the information would be flagged for immediate review by the Necron overlord when he awakens, because this is precisely the kind of anomaly that requires organic, or at least highly sophisticated artificial intelligence to properly evaluate. The Dreadnought itself would remain unaware of any of this. The Space Marine inside sleeps dreamlessly in stasis, his consciousness completely suspended. He does not know that he has become the subject of intense scrutiny by Xenos technology from the dawn of the galaxy. He does not know that machines are debating his fate in protocols and languages that predate humanity by 60 million years. He simply sleeps in his tomb within a tomb, waiting for a call to battle that may come from a very unexpected source. Necron analysis and strategic classification. When the Necron overlord finally awakens, when consciousness returns to the being who has slept for millions of years in his ornate sarcophagus, his first actions are always the same. He reviews the data compiled by the tomb mind during his sleep. He assesses the current strategic situation. He determines what threats exist and what resources are available to counter them. And in this case, he would be informed almost immediately about the anomaly. An unknown piece of technology containing organic life, located in a restricted section of the tomb, of uncertain origin and purpose. The Overlord's reaction would depend greatly on which dynasty he belongs to, what his personality was like before biotransference, and how much that personality has degraded during the long sleep. Some Necron nobles awaken with their minds relatively intact, their memories clear, and their strategic faculties sharp. Others emerge confused, their consciousness fragmented by eons of dreamless sleep and the trauma of biotransference itself. And still others awaken with specific obsessions or manias, their minds locked into patterns of thought that make them unpredictable. An overlord of the Sultek dynasty, known for their methodical approach to warfare and their emphasis on overwhelming force, might view the Dreadnought purely as a tactical problem to be solved. It is an unknown variable in his tomb, and unknown variables must be eliminated or neutralized. He might order its immediate destruction, not out of malice, but simply because destroying it is the cleanest solution. The resources expended would be minimal, and the threat, whatever it actually is, would be permanently removed. An overlord of the Nihilakh dynasty, whose tomb worlds are known for their defensive posture and their focus on protecting their territories, might take a different approach. To him, the Dreadnought represents an intrusion into sovereign Necron space. It is a violation that must be addressed, but one that also deserves investigation. Why is this thing here? How did it get into the tomb? Does its presence indicate a larger threat, perhaps a force of these younger beings operating on the surface? These questions would need answers before a proper response could be formulated. A cryptech, one of the technomages who serve as scientists and engineers to the Necron nobility, would have an entirely different perspective. To a cryptech, the Dreadnought would be fascinating on purely intellectual grounds. Here is technology from a younger race, technology that attempts to solve a problem the Necrons solved perfectly 60 million years ago. How crude is their implementation? What principles do they use? What can be learned from examining their attempts? A cryptech might advocate strongly for preservation and study rather than destruction, viewing the Dreadnought as a valuable research specimen. The analysis that the Overlord and his advisors would undertake would be sophisticated and multi-layered. They would examine the Dreadnought from technological, strategic, and even philosophical perspectives. From a technological standpoint, they would want to understand how the machine functions, what powers it, what weapons it carries, and how effective it would be in combat. Canoptech constructs would have already provided detailed scans, but the Necron leadership would want more in-depth analysis. They might order that the Dreadnought be physically dissected, its components examined piece by piece. Cryptechs would study the power source, determining its efficiency and operational lifespan. They would analyze the weapons, testing the potency of the ammunition and the effectiveness of the targeting systems. They would examine the armor, subjecting samples to various forms of attack to determine its resilience. And most intriguingly, they would study the sarcophagus and the organic component within. This last point would generate the most discussion among the Necrons. The being inside the Dreadnought is not dead, not truly. It exists in a state of preservation, its body maintained by technology, its consciousness suspended but potentially retrievable. The Necrons would recognize this as fundamentally similar to their own situation before biotransference. The Necrontyre also used stasis technology extensively, though they lacked the ability to make it permanent solution to their mortality. They would see in the Dreadnought pilot an attempt to extend life through technological means, an echo of their own desperate quest for immortality. Some Necrons might feel something approaching respect for this attempt, recognizing the determination required to create such a system. Others might feel contempt, viewing it as a crude and ultimately doomed effort to achieve what the Necrons accomplished so much more effectively. And still others might feel a strange kinship, understanding that the being inside the Dreadnought is, like themselves, a warrior who was not allowed to rest, who was preserved beyond natural life to serve his civilization in perpetuity. From a strategic perspective, the Overlord would want to know what the Dreadnought's presence indicates about the current state of the galaxy. If technology like this exists, what does that say about the younger races? How widespread is this civilization that builds such machines? How numerous are their warriors? What level of threat do they pose to Necron plans for galactic reclamation? The Overlord might order that the tomb's systems scan for similar energy signatures on the surface or in orbit, trying to determine if more of these machines are present. He might dispatch reconnaissance forces to gather intelligence about the current inhabitants of the world, learning what he can about humanity and the Imperium. He would be looking for context, trying to place the Dreadnought within a larger strategic picture. There would also be protocol considerations. Necron nobility follow codes of conduct that date back millions of years, though these codes have been corrupted and simplified by the effects of biotransference. Some overlords retain a sense of honor that demands certain behaviors toward worthy opponents. If the Overlord determines that the Dreadnought pilot is a warrior of sufficient status, he might feel compelled to offer a form of recognition, if only through the manner of his execution. Other overlords have no such compunctions. They view all younger races as little more than animals, unworthy of consideration beyond their potential as threats or resources. These overlords would see destroying the Dreadnought as equivalent to crushing an insect, no different from eliminating any other piece of inferior technology that found its way into the tomb. The philosophical implications would not be lost on those Necrons who retain sufficient consciousness to contemplate such matters. The Dreadnought represents a parallel solution to the problem of mortality. The Imperium takes its greatest warriors and preserves them in machines, keeping them alive to fight indefinitely. The Necrons did the same thing, though they went further, transferring not just their warriors, but their entire civilization into mechanical bodies. Both approaches attempt to cheat death through technology. Both preserve consciousness beyond the natural lifespan of organic beings. Both ultimately trap their subjects in a form of existence that is more curse than blessing. A particularly philosophical Necron, perhaps one who has come to regret biotransference and longs for the organic existence he lost 60 million years ago, might see in the Dreadnought a mirror of his own fate. Here is another being trapped in metal, kept alive against natural law, forced to fight endlessly because his civilization decided his life was too valuable to end. The parallel would be impossible to ignore, and it might provoke unexpected reactions. Pity, anger, a grim acknowledgement of shared suffering. These emotions would be muted by biotransference, filtered through mechanical thought processes that no longer fully understand organic feelings. But something would remain, some recognition of kinship, however unwanted. The classification the Necrons ultimately assign to the Dreadnought would determine its fate. If they classify it as an immediate threat requiring neutralization, they would destroy it without hesitation, their weapons reducing it to atomic particles in seconds. If they classify it as a potential intelligence source, they might attempt to access its systems, extracting data about Imperial forces and capabilities. If they classify it as a research specimen, they might preserve it indefinitely, keeping it in stasis while cryptechs study it at their leisure. The process of making this classification would involve extensive debate among the Necron leadership, assuming the tomb has awakened enough nobles to form something resembling a command council. Different factions within the tomb's hierarchy might advocate for different approaches. The military commanders would likely favor destruction or combat testing, wanting to understand the threat level this technology represents. The cryptechs would push for preservation and study, arguing that destroying the specimen wastes valuable research opportunities. Any Necron nobles who have retained philosophical inclinations might want time to contemplate the implications of finding another civilization's immortality technology. This debate would be conducted in ways that younger races would find alien and disturbing. The Necrons do not argue with passion or emotion. Their biotransferred minds process information and reach conclusions based on logic matrices and priority hierarchies programmed millions of years ago. The discussion would sound more like machines exchanging data than living beings debating policy. Yet beneath that mechanical discourse, traces of personality would emerge. An overlord known for his caution would calculate risk factors differently than one known for aggression. A cryptech obsessed with understanding biotransference might see different research value than one focused on weapons development. Time would not be a factor in their deliberations. The Necrons can afford to spend weeks or months analyzing the situation, running simulations, conducting non-invasive scans, and building comprehensive threat assessments before making any decision. From their perspective, this Dreadnought has already been in their tomb for potentially centuries. A few more weeks while they determine the optimal response changes, nothing. This patience, this willingness to invest time in proper analysis, is one of the Necrons' greatest advantages, and something that frustrates younger races who think in terms of days and years rather than millennia. And if, unlikely but possible, they classify it as something approximating an equal, a warrior of a younger race who nonetheless deserves a measure of respect, they might choose a very different path. They might wake it. They might restore power to its systems, reactivate its sarcophagus, and bring the Space Marine within back to consciousness. Why would they do this? Perhaps to interrogate it, to learn more about the Imperium from a direct source, perhaps to test it, measuring the capabilities of these younger beings in direct combat. Or perhaps, most intriguingly, out of a sense that warriors should die in battle rather than in their sleep, that even a primitive younger race deserves the chance to fall with weapons in hand. The awakening confrontation. The first sensation would be pain. Not physical pain exactly, though the neural connections between flesh and machine always generate discomfort when reactivating. No, this would be the deeper pain of consciousness returning after deep stasis, the mind struggling to orient itself after a sleep that could have lasted years or centuries, for all the pilot knows. Time has no meaning in stasis. The Space Marine might believe he was just put to sleep this morning, or he might somehow sense that eons have passed. The confusion would be total and disorienting. Systems boot up in sequence, each one announced by a chime or status indicator that the pilot's enhanced perception registers. Power core online. Life support stabilizing. Neural interface initializing. Weapons systems check. Each component reporting its status, creating a cascade of information that the Space Marine's mind must process. But something is wrong. The activation sequence is wrong. The protocols are not being followed correctly. Systems are coming online in an order that does not match standard procedure. Because the Necrons are not using Imperial activation codes, they are forcing the Dreadnought awake through brute application of power, overriding safeties and bypassing security protocols. They are not gentle about it. To them, this is simply a matter of reactivating a piece of captured equipment so they can study how it operates. The fact that there is a living being inside, one who deserves careful and respectful awakening according to Imperial tradition, does not occur to them, or is deemed irrelevant if it does. The Space Marine's first conscious thought would be confusion. Where am I? What happened? The last thing he remembers is battle, perhaps, or being put into stasis by his chapter's tech marines. But this awakening feels wrong. The chamber around him is not the sepulchre where dreadnoughts sleep when not needed for battle. The electromagnetic spectrum his sensors detect is strange, filled with signatures that do not match Imperial technology. And there are presences nearby, lots of them, unidentified contacts that his targeting systems want to classify as hostile but cannot properly identify. He tries to move and finds that he can, that the Dreadnought's motor functions are responsive. But the machine feels different, as if it has been interfered with, examined, partially disassembled and reassembled. Warning runes appear in his vision, courtesy of the machine spirit, indicating that several systems have been compromised. Not destroyed, but accessed, studied, their secrets laid bare to unknown parties. This violation would provoke immediate rage in most Space Marines. Their equipment is sacred, maintained through ritual and prayer. Having it tampered with by Xenos is an insult that demands response. Then he would see them, Necron warriors, dozens or hundreds of them, arranged in perfect geometric formations throughout the chamber. They stand motionless, watching with eye lenses that glow with an eerie green light. They do not speak, do not gesture, simply observe with the patience of beings who have nothing but time. And behind them, larger figures, Necron immortals with heavier weaponry, Lich Guard bearing war scythes that crackle with dimensional energy, and finally, the Overlord himself. The Overlord would be unmistakable. His body would be more ornate than the warriors, decorated with sigils and symbols that denote rank and dynasty. He might carry a resurrection orb, that device which can pull Necron warriors back from destruction, or a phase sword capable of cutting through any matter. He would radiate authority in a way that transcends mere appearance, his very presence announcing that this is a being of power and command. For a moment, neither side would move. The Space Marine, still disoriented from forced awakening, would be trying to assess the situation and formulate a response. The Necrons, patient beyond human comprehension, would simply wait, observing, gathering data about how this primitive machine and its organic core operate under stress. The tension would build, both sides aware that violence is almost certainly about to erupt, but neither quite willing to make the first move. Then the Overlord would speak. His voice would emerge from speakers integrated into his necrodermis body, the mechanical tones translated into Gothic by language processing systems that have learned every tongue that has ever existed in the galaxy. The words would be formal, perhaps even ceremonial, spoken in the style of ancient Necron nobility addressing a defeated enemy. He might acknowledge the Space Marine as a warrior, recognizing the function, if not the worth, of the Dreadnought. He might explain, with the condescension of a being who has lived for millions of years, addressing a mayfly of a creature, that the Space Marine is in Necron territory now, that this tomb belongs to a dynasty that held power when the Marine's ancestors had not yet learned to make fire. He might offer a choice, provide information and die quickly, or resist and die slowly. Or he might simply announce that the Marine's death will serve as valuable data about the combat capabilities of younger race technology. The Space Marine's response would depend greatly on the individual within the Dreadnought. Some would immediately attack, their training and indoctrination overriding any strategic considerations. To such a warrior, the presence of Xenos is sufficient justification for violence, and the fact that he is outnumbered and in enemy territory changes nothing. They would charge forward, weapons blazing, determined to kill as many Necrons as possible before being overwhelmed. Others might attempt to gather intelligence even as they prepare for combat. Questions would be demanded. Where is this? How long has it been? What happened to the Space Marines who were with me? These questions would not be answered, or if they were, the answers would be delivered in ways designed to emphasize the Space Marines' helplessness. You have been here for centuries, forgotten by your kind. Your chapter believes you destroyed. There is no rescue coming. A veteran Dreadnought pilot, one who has fought for centuries or millennia and seen countless battles, might try a different approach. He might attempt to reason with the Necrons, proposing negotiation or even temporary alliance against mutual enemies. After all, both the Imperium and the Necrons face threats from chaos, from Tyranids, from various other horrors. Could they not find common ground, at least temporarily? This approach would almost certainly fail. The Necrons do not negotiate with younger races, except under very specific circumstances, and being found sleeping in their tomb does not create a negotiating position. The Overlord would view such suggestions with something between amusement and contempt. Propose alliance? With primitives who stumbled into our tomb and slept here like animals? The very idea would be offensive to Necron pride. The battle, when it begins, would be brutal but brief. The Dreadnought is powerful, no question. Its weapons can devastate Necron warriors, the assault cannon shredding their bodies with hundreds of high-caliber rounds per second, the plasma cannon reducing them to glowing slag. The Power Fist can crush necrodermis, despite its self-repair properties, pulverizing Necron bodies with impacts that generate pressure measured in atmospheres. A Dreadnought fully supplied and supported is a formidable opponent, even for the ancient Necrons. But this Dreadnought is neither fully supplied nor supported. It has limited ammunition, the reserves in its chassis depleted during whatever battle originally left it stranded. Its power core is not operating at full capacity, having been drained by years or centuries of minimal function while buried. And it is alone, without the tactical support that Space Marines depend upon, without battle brothers to guard its flanks or provide covering fire. The Necrons, by contrast, have overwhelming numbers and the home field advantage. They know every meter of this tomb, every corridor and chamber. They can phase through walls, appearing behind the Dreadnought and attacking from unexpected angles. Their Gauss weapons strip matter away, layer by layer, even the Dreadnought's blessed adamantium, succumbing eventually to enough sustained fire. And if the Dreadnought manages to destroy individual Necrons, they simply reconstruct via reanimation protocols, or are phase-shifted back to resurrection crypts, where their bodies are repaired. The Space Marine within would fight with all the skill and fury that the Adeptus Astartes are known for. He would make every shot count, every strike devastating. He would adapt to the enemy's tactics, learning their patterns of movement and exploitation of weaknesses. He would roar battle prayers to the Emperor, his voice amplified through the Dreadnought's external speakers, filling the tomb with litanies of hate against the Xenos. But ultimately, inevitably, he would lose. The ammunition would run dry, the power core would fail, the armor would be breached in too many places, critical systems failing one by one. The Dreadnought would slow, then stumble, then fall, crashing to the floor of the tomb with a sound like the death of gods. And in that moment of final failure, as systems shut down and consciousness begins to fade, the Space Marine might experience something unexpected: relief. Because for all the horror of being overwhelmed by Xenos in an ancient tomb far from any help, for all the failure that his death represents, it is still a warrior's death. It is battle, combat, a Space Marine doing what he was created to do. It is infinitely preferable to spending more centuries in stasis, waiting to be awakened for brief moments of violence before being put back to sleep. The existence of a Dreadnought pilot is one of profound isolation and suffering, and death in battle might be the closest thing to mercy such a being can hope for. The Necrons would stand over the fallen Dreadnought, observing its death with the same cold detachment they brought to its awakening. The Overlord might order that the wreckage be preserved for further study, or he might command its complete destruction. Disintegration at molecular level, ensuring no trace remains. Either way, the Space Marine's last battle would be over, his service finally ended, his vigil complete. But there is another possibility, one that certain more sophisticated Necron nobles might consider. What if they did not kill the Space Marine? What if instead they placed him back into stasis and kept him as a specimen, a living example of younger race technology to be studied indefinitely? This would be a fate worse than death for any Space Marine, to become a curiosity in a Xenos collection, unable to die, unable to serve, simply existing in eternal captivity. It would be a cruelty that even the Necrons, with their muted capacity for malice, might recognize as particularly fitting. Broader implications and known incidents. The encounter between a sleeping Dreadnought and an awakening Necron tomb world, while not common in Imperial records, represents a broader pattern that has repeated itself across the galaxy countless times in various forms. It is the story of old meeting new, of ancient powers waking to find the galaxy transformed and occupied by younger species who have no concept of the forces they are disturbing. The specifics may vary, but the fundamentals remain constant. Ignorance, violation of sacred space, and violence erupting from the collision of incompatible worldviews. The Damnos incident provides perhaps the best documented example of what happens when Space Marines encounter an awakening tomb world, though it did not involve a Dreadnought specifically. The planet Damnos was an Ultramarines recruitment world, one where the chapter maintained a substantial presence and recruited new initiates from the hardy population. What the Ultramarines did not know was that deep beneath the ice caps, a Necron tomb world was beginning its awakening sequence, its systems slowly coming online after 60 million years of dormancy. When the Necrons finally breached the surface, the result was catastrophic. The Ultramarines found themselves fighting an enemy unlike any they had faced before. Warriors who could not be permanently killed, who wielded weapons that ignored armor, who operated with tactical efficiency derived from millions of years of warfare. The chapter took heavy casualties, losing battle brothers who had served for centuries. Captain Cato Sicarius led the defense personally. But even his tactical genius struggled against an enemy that could simply phase out when threatened and return later with full strength. The campaign was eventually abandoned, Damnos declared lost to the Necron threat. This represented a profound defeat for the Ultramarines, a chapter that prides itself on protecting its territories and never yielding ground to any enemy. The loss of Damnos sent ripples through the Imperium's strategic planning, forcing military leaders to acknowledge that a new type of threat had emerged, one that did not conform to known patterns and could not be fought using conventional doctrines. The implications were vast. If Damnos could fall, what about other worlds? How many Imperial planets were actually Necron tomb worlds waiting to activate? The answer, terrifyingly, was impossible to determine. The Necrons had built millions of tombs across the galaxy before entering their great sleep. Many of those tombs were on worlds that later became inhabited by younger races. The Imperium alone holds roughly 1 million worlds, and an unknown percentage of those might have Necron complexes deep underground, their presence undetected by augurs and surveys. The Imperial response to this realization has been necessarily incomplete and haphazard. The Imperium lacks the resources to survey every world in its territory for Necron presence. And even if it did, the tomb worlds are specifically designed to evade detection. Many tombs exist in pocket dimensions or use phase technology to remain invisible to conventional scanners. The Adeptus Mechanicus has developed some specialized detection equipment capable of identifying certain Necron energy signatures, but deploying this equipment across 1 million worlds would take centuries at minimum. Meanwhile, tomb worlds continue awakening on their own schedules, emerging when conditions meet their programmed parameters, or when random chance triggers malfunctioning systems. This has created a climate of paranoia within certain levels of Imperial command. Planetary governors on older, more thoroughly settled worlds rest slightly easier, reasoning that if Necrons were present, they would have awakened by now, given the extensive mining and construction that has occurred over millennia. But governors of more recently colonized worlds, particularly those on the fringes of Imperial space, or in sectors with unusual geological readings, live with the constant worry that tomorrow might bring an awakening. Some have requisitioned ground-penetrating radar systems and seismic monitors, hoping to detect any unusual activity deep underground. Others have simply resigned themselves to ignorance, knowing that if Necrons are present beneath their cities, there is little they can do to prevent an eventual confrontation. The Orphean War provides another example of large-scale Necron awakening and Imperial response. In this campaign, multiple Necron dynasties in the Orpheus sector began coordinating their efforts, launching simultaneous attacks on Imperial worlds throughout the region. The Imperial response involved elements from 15 different Space Marine chapters, plus substantial Imperial Guard forces and Navy assets. The war dragged on for years, consuming enormous resources and resulting in the complete annihilation of some participating units. What made the Orphean War particularly devastating was the Necrons' superior strategic mobility. They could use dolmen gates, ancient warp-like constructs that allowed instantaneous travel between tomb worlds, to shift forces wherever they were needed, faster than the Imperium could respond. They could also phase out entire armies when facing overwhelming opposition, retreating to their tombs to repair and return later at full strength. The Imperium, bound by the relatively slow speeds of warp travel and unable to simply regenerate destroyed units, fought at a fundamental disadvantage. These major conflicts highlight what would happen if a single Dreadnought's encounter with Necrons escalated into something larger. If the Dreadnought managed to send a distress signal before being overwhelmed, if its chapter learned what had happened, they would respond with overwhelming force. Space Marines never abandon their fallen, and they certainly would not tolerate one of their ancient heroes being held or studied by Xenos. A full strike force might deploy to the Tomb World, determined to recover the Dreadnought, or at least ensure it did not remain in enemy hands. This would trigger exactly the kind of escalating conflict that Tomb Worlds are designed to handle through their sophisticated command protocols and hierarchical response systems. As Imperial forces committed more resources, the tomb would awaken more defenders, following its programmed protocols. What started as a small retrieval operation could quickly spiral into a full-scale war, with the tomb eventually deploying its most powerful units and even contacting nearby Necron dynasties for reinforcement. The planet would become another battlefield in the galaxy's eternal wars, its original inhabitants caught in the crossfire between post-human warriors and deathless machines. There are also whispered rumors in Imperial records, fragments of reports from Inquisitors and Adeptus Mechanicus investigators, of stranger encounters. Some speak of Space Marine artifacts found in Necron collections, relics that should not exist because they date from chapters that have been dead for centuries. How did the Necrons acquire these items? Were they taken from captured warriors, retrieved from battlefields? Or might some Space Marines have been preserved in Necron stasis fields, kept as specimens or test subjects for cryptech experiments? The Adeptus Mechanicus has a particularly complicated relationship with Necron tomb worlds. On one hand, these sites contain technologies from the Dark Age of technology, or even earlier, artifacts that could unlock mysteries the Mechanicus has been seeking for millennia. On the other hand, they are Xenos constructs, prohibited by Imperial law and doctrine. Some tech priests have nevertheless attempted to study Necron tombs, either officially through sanctioned excavations or secretly through unauthorized research. These efforts rarely end well. The tomb systems detect the intrusions and respond with force, or the tech priests inadvertently trigger full awakening sequences, unleashing Necron forces on unsuspecting Imperial populations. The planet Imperium, as previously mentioned, exemplifies these complications perfectly and demonstrates how layers of occupation and conflict can accumulate over time. The world served as both an Imperial burial world and a Necron tomb world, with the Adeptus Mechanicus conducting extensive research into the underground Xenos structures. The presence of the crashed battle barge, Sword of Atreus on the surface, combined with the deep Mechanicus excavations, created exactly the kind of multi-layered situation where Imperial and Necron technology might intersect in unexpected ways. While no Dreadnought was specifically mentioned in the Imperium lore, the conditions existed for such an encounter to occur. And similar situations almost certainly exist on thousands of worlds across the Imperium, where ancient and modern forces exist in uneasy proximity. From a broader strategic perspective, encounters like a Dreadnought in a Necron tomb force both sides to update their understanding of each other. The Imperium learns more about Necron capabilities, discovering the extent of their technological sophistication and their ability to analyze and potentially replicate Imperial designs. The Necrons, for their part, gain intelligence about how the younger races have developed, what technologies they have achieved, and what level of threat they might pose to Necron plans for galactic reclamation. This intelligence gathering has implications far beyond individual encounters. Both sides are accumulating knowledge that will shape future conflicts. The Imperium adds to its already extensive files on Xenos threats, developing new tactics and doctrines for fighting Necrons based on lessons learned from each engagement. The Necrons update their databases with information about Imperial capabilities, adjusting their own strategies to account for what they have observed. Each battle, even small ones like a single Dreadnought facing a newly awakened tomb, contributes to this ongoing exchange of strategic intelligence. The psychological impact should not be underestimated either. For Space Marines who learn that one of their ancient heroes was lost in a Necron tomb, the knowledge is devastating. It represents failure on multiple levels: failure to protect a battle brother, failure to maintain proper oversight of force deployments, failure to recognize the threat lurking beneath an apparently safe world. The chapter would likely conduct extensive reviews of their procedures, implementing new protocols to prevent similar losses in the future. For the Necrons, the encounter would be filed away in their vast archives as just another data point about the current state of the galaxy. They would note the existence of the Imperium, categorize human technological capabilities, and adjust their strategic priorities accordingly. But on a deeper level, some Necron nobles might find the encounter thought-provoking in ways they do not fully understand. The sight of another warrior preserved beyond his natural life, kept alive to serve when he should have been allowed to rest, might trigger responses in their corrupted emotional matrices, reminders of what they themselves lost 60 million years ago. Conclusion: tombs within tombs. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is no peace, no rest, no release from duty. This truth applies as much to the sleeping warriors in their ancient tombs as it does to those who still fight under open skies. A Space Marine entombed in a Dreadnought and a Necron preserved in living metal are both examples of the same fundamental principle. In this galaxy, even death is not allowed to end service. Warriors are preserved, maintained, and awakened again and again to fight wars that may have no resolution, conflicts that stretch across eons with no victory in sight. The scenario of a Necron tomb discovering a sleeping Dreadnought buried in its depths is more than just an interesting tactical situation. It is a meditation on the nature of duty, sacrifice, and the price civilizations pay when they refuse to let their warriors rest. Both the Space Marine and the Necrons chose this fate, after a fashion. The Marine accepted his internment because duty demanded it, and his chapter required his service. The Necrons underwent biotransference because they believed it was the only path to salvation. Both made sacrifices that seemed necessary at the time, but whose full cost only became apparent later. We have explored how such an encounter might unfold. The tomb systems detecting the anomaly, the canoptech constructs investigating, the tomb mind attempting to classify this unknown technology, the Necron nobility awakening to find a younger race's artifact in their sacred space, and finally, the confrontation when the Dreadnought is forcibly reactivated and must face overwhelming odds in an enemy stronghold far from any help. At each stage, we see how two very different approaches to preserving warriors intersect and ultimately conflict. The technical details matter. Understanding how Necron sensor systems work, how Dreadnought life support functions, how tomb defense protocols operate, all of this provides the foundation for envisioning what such an encounter would actually look like. But the deeper meaning transcends mere technical specifications. This is about what happens when two civilizations that have mastered different forms of immortality come face to face and must confront what they see in each other, a mirror, however distorted, of their own attempts to cheat death. The tragedy is that neither side would likely recognize or acknowledge this kinship. The Space Marine would see only Xenos, abominations to be destroyed in the Emperor's name. The Necrons would see only primitives, younger beings whose crude attempts at immortality pale in comparison to their own perfect achievement. Both would miss the fundamental truth. They are victims of the same impulse, the drive to preserve warriors beyond their natural span. consequences be damned. This pattern repeats across the galaxy in countless variations. Ancient meeting, new, sacred spaces violated by those who do not understand their significance. Warriors who never chose their fate being forced into conflict by the decisions of leaders who will never face the same consequences. The specifics change, the names and locations vary, but the fundamental story remains the same, and it will continue to repeat as long as civilizations keep choosing eternal war over eternal rest for their greatest heroes. For those of us who explore these dark reaches of the 41st millennium, stories like this one remind us why the setting resonates so powerfully. It is not just about space marines fighting aliens or ancient evils awakening. It is about the costs of survival in a universe that offers no good choices, only varying degrees of awfulness. It is about warriors preserved beyond death to fight wars that cannot be won. And it is about the moments when these different forms of eternal suffering intersect, creating situations where neither side is entirely wrong or entirely right, just trapped in circumstances neither fully chose and from which neither can escape. If you found this deep dive into Necron tomb worlds and Space Marine dreadnoughts valuable, if you appreciate the exploration of what happens when these two eternal warriors meet in the darkness beneath distant planets, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support allows me to continue researching and creating content about the rich lore of Warhammer 40,000, diving into scenarios that examine not just the battles themselves, but their deeper meanings and implications. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on how you think such an encounter might unfold differently, what other questions you would like to see explored, or what other aspects of the grimdark future you want to understand better. Thank you for watching, and may the Emperor protect you in whatever darkness you face.